Hello everybody, welcome to Alan Wall's Photography and the Back to Basics Macro Photography video series. This is video number 2 in which we are going to talk about cameras. If you're interested in early, ad-free content with extra bonus material, discounts on the course, as well as free live stream events and gosh knows what else, then come over to Patreon and experience this whole thing a day earlier in Technicolor. Whatever that is, we'll have it for you. Okay, Patreon, you need to be there. Thank you to my Patreon supporters. So today we're talking about cameras. What cameras can you use for macro close-up photography? Well, any camera you want. Just get close enough to it. The end. There are certain cameras that lend themselves to macro better than others, and it's not rocket science. You already know what they are. But I am going to explain to you a couple of the ways you might be able to use cameras that you have while you save up for your first DSLR or mirrorless. You can do very passable macro photography with a phone. If there's a condition, the phone has to have a camera. If you have a telephone, an old-fashioned telephone, it's terrible for macro photography. Write that down. You remember this. This is an Apexel's 100mm macro lens from Apexel. And this thing became quite quickly one of my favorite macro gadgets to have in the field. You'll remember I did a video with this and I did a lot of macro video with it of dragonflies. This type of thing, there's this one and there's the high-end one, which I have here somewhere, which is the Moment lens, which is gorgeous. It's a more expensive lens, a nicer glass, but you know, it's also a lot more expensive, like 4 times as expensive or more. This little thing's fantastic. There are limitations. It is an entirely digital process. You don't have the same optical system in a cell phone as you do in a camera, so it's limited. Lighting's tricky, especially with a tablet, and you need something else with it. Though I know that most of these cameras now come with a dedicated macro lens. It usually still helps to add some optical magnification to get a better close-up picture, but certainly you can do it. It's a little, to me, uncomfortable holding a phone where every time you touch it, it turns something on, or a button calls your mother or somebody else's mother is even worse. You don't have the same lighting options that you would have with a camera. A lot of reasons why this is, for me, very much a secondary method when I just need something quick. I use this for my videos. I will take a picture. You know what? I'm going to do that right now because otherwise I'll forget. So I'm making a video. I'm making a video on macro photography, and we're talking about cameras. So I'll probably want to add a couple of photographs of cameras to the video, maybe of the Apexels. So I use my cell phone to do macro photography. Sure, actually work with it. But what about getting serious about it? What if you want to buy a camera, a dedicated device for taking pictures, not for calling people? A lot of people would have started out their photography career with something that looks like this, which I guess these days you'd call this a not very good cell phone. It doesn't make calls or texts. It just takes pictures, so it's probably, you wouldn't want it. But this little thing takes decent pictures. A nice little camera. What can you do with close-up with this? Nothing, unless it has a close-up mode, which they all do. They all have a button for macro on the back, and what that means is nothing. This is not your typical macro equipment. There's no way you can modify the lens because it goes back in its shell when you turn the thing off. You can't attach anything to it. You can't put an extension tube on it. You can't even change the lens. So really, the only thing you can do with this is what it lets you do with the program settings. And it's not that impressive. I think it gets you to about 1 to 4. Oh, that was what it was saying on the back, wasn't it? So it gives you magnification of 1 to 2.7, which is not bad. 1 to 3. There are other reasons why this is not a good camera for macro, and that comes down to the controls. In the first video, we were talking about the trade-offs in macro photography. Well, part of that is understanding and working with exposure as a second nature thing. And you can't really do much with exposure with this, because if you can change things like the aperture, it would take 10 minutes of going through menus to even find it. One of the things that you'll discover, if you haven't already, is that to really do macro photography comfortably, you need equipment that gives you controls at your fingertips, because you have to change everything yourself. It's not a computer that's doing it. So from the compact camera, where did we go from there? The next thing up is probably these days what they would call a bridge camera. It's really any camera that's a bit fancier than that has a fixed lens. This is a prehistoric, by today's standards, Sony Mavic. Took pictures onto a CD. Yeah, you remember CDs? Do you remember records? CDs replaced well, you probably know that. When I bought this, I think it worked. Yeah, look at this. It's got a Sony battery in it. I don't think it has electrons in it, but so a camera like this is really a very capable camera. Ask anybody who owned one of these. These things cost a fortune when they came out, these Sony Mavics. They really took fantastic pictures. The issue, of course, is that this lens is integrated into the camera and it moves in and out, and you can't do much with it. I'm not even sure you can put a filter on it. You certainly cannot put an extension tube on it. So you're really, again, limited to a slightly lesser extent than with the compact camera. Even though it looks like it's got buttons all over the place, they're buttons to run the CD player. They're really not camera buttons. You can't change the aperture or the shutter speed or anything like that. It's just got program modes on it. Does it have a manual mode? You know, I'll be completely honest with you. I've never shot one of these. Let's just say that this, while a very nice camera back in the day, is probably not your first choice for macro. Good enough? Let's move on to something you're more likely to have. It's interesting, but after the bridge camera, most articles you read or books that have been published, they talk about the step up from the bridge camera being going to this new technology of mirrorless cameras. I don't like mirrorless cameras, no secret about that, but I would be out of my mind to suggest that these cameras are not as capable as DSLRs when it comes to taking fantastic quality pictures. Why then would I not use one for macro photography? Well, I do use it. I use it as the camera that I use with my microscope. I have focus stacked with it, and it does all of that perfectly well. There are some things it does better than the DSLR. It doesn't have a mirror flopping around back and forth, so it doesn't vibrate. Generally speaking, these cameras have far, far better image stabilization. Not because the image stabilization on DSLR lenses is bad by any means. It's just that the mirrorless cameras have it in their body as well. They have this in-body image stabilization that moves the sensor to keep up with the wobbling of the camera, which is insanely brilliant. So the bottom line is that the modern DSLR and the modern mirrorless camera are much the same. I don't think that there is a legitimate argument against or for a DSLR or a mirrorless. These days, they're all so good. I will tell you the things I don't like about the mirrorless cameras that I've used, and the reason I don't use mirrorless in the field or on the rail is in the field, I don't like the ergonomics of any of these cameras that I've used until yesterday when I used a Lumix S5, which actually felt like a DSLR in my hand. But the other problem is the electronic viewfinder for me is unacceptable still. Now, I haven't picked up a Z9 or a Z7 for that matter to see if that viewfinder is any better. I do not like looking at a video representation of what I'm getting ready to photograph. There's another reason, which is really more why I would favor using a full frame over a crop frame camera, which I do. I much prefer in the field to be using a full frame camera, and that is because of the lenses. The full frame cameras have bigger pixels, they have better low light performance, but their glass is made for that higher resolution imagery. So the best lenses are full frame lenses. Now, that's true also on mirrorless cameras. So I would make that argument as well, that if I was to use a mirrorless camera for handheld macro, it would be a full frame. I think that's important. Full frame for me is necessary to get the best pictures when you're hand holding. When you're using a rail, I think it becomes a little harder to pin that down. The main reason that I don't use a full frame camera on my macro rail is because my full frame camera is usually with me in the field. I mean, that's what I use for video. It's what I use for field macro. It's what I use for everything except shooting on a rail. If I had two full frame cameras, yes, I think one of them would be on the rail too. So there's that. So I guess the question most people would want to know is, well, you know, you're a macro photographer, Alan. What's the best camera? What should I buy if money's no object? Well, if money's no object, buy me one, Hasselblad, please. But if it's absolutely no object, then get the camera you love. Get the one that you're comfortable with, because at the end of the day, the one you have the most confidence in is the best camera. I don't think there's anything in them. I mean, the sensors are all made in the same factory. The electronics are all close to perfect. It's really that. It's what are you comfortable with? What do you trust? Who has the best service reputation? Who gets your camera back to you quickest? Who are easiest to deal with? Which camera lets you use the best lenses, the ones you really like the most? And in macro, of course, we use so many crazy lenses that even isn't that much of an issue. There isn't much in it. Once you get above a basic entry level, not enough buttons, too much menu DSLR, once you get above that, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what you have. It doesn't matter if you have a micro four thirds. I personally don't think your pictures are going to have the same richness and feel that a full frame DSLR will give you, but it'll be close enough. You'll take great pictures with that. So if that's what makes you comfortable, if the Olympus is the way you want to go, and because you love their lenses, then get it. Same for the Canon mirrorless, the Lumix. I've shot a lot of cameras this weekend, and they're all good. Some you're going to like more than others, and I suggest you go with the one that you like the most and are most comfortable with. I don't know of any that I would warn you away from. Well, there's one. I shouldn't do that. I'll get in trouble. There isn't a camera that I recommend. I recommend you avoid cameras that don't give you control over exposure at your fingertips. Avoid cameras whose menus you can't understand or who that frustrate you. If there are any features you need and the camera doesn't have it, don't bother getting it, because you'll be miserable. But most of them do have all the features. And DSLRs aren't going anywhere. If you want and like a full frame DSLR, then buy one. They will be around for your lifetime. So the camera is not much more than just the life support system for the sensor. And the sensors are all made pretty much in the same place. And they're all fantastic. And they're all getting better with every new camera. So providing there are no issues with a particular camera that you've heard about that scares you off of them, then get the one that feels good to you. Get the one that when you pick it up in your hand, it feels like it belongs there, because some cameras will and some cameras won't. I haven't mentioned medium format cameras. Let me show you my Hasselblad. I'm only kidding. I don't have a Hasselblad. I don't even have a hat that says Hasselblad on it. You don't hear about a lot of people using medium format cameras for macro photography. Why is that? Well, it's probably because there aren't a lot of people using medium format cameras compared to those of us using full frame and crop frame. That's probably why you don't hear about as many of them, but there are certainly plenty of people doing macro photography with medium format. Carl Taylor, one of my favorite photography instructors, uses almost exclusively the 6HN, the big Hasselblad full frame 100 megapixel with macro lenses all the time, shooting watches and other jewelry, that type of thing. So yeah, you certainly can. I would absolutely love to try it. Now, your depth of field is going to be pretty tough to work with. And having a tilt shift lens isn't going to help that much. So it's a focus stacking thing. But we're not going to get ahead of ourselves. Let's wrap up the camera talk by saying this. Get the camera you're comfortable with. You won't go wrong. As long as it has interchangeable lenses, a hot shoe where you can put some kind of flash attachment, if it has a menu that you understand, and if it has enough buttons for you to be able to control the exposure with your fingertips without having to get into a menu, use that camera. That camera will be great. That's it. Get the camera you're confident in, and then stop thinking about cameras altogether and start worrying about lenses, because that is going to make a difference. And that's what we're going to talk about next time. We're going to cover macro lenses from all the camera brands, and we're going to look at what the really good ones are, and I'm going to give you some actual recommendations. All right, guys, that's it for cameras. Tell me below, what are you shooting with and why? Why is it the best? Would you recommend your camera for everybody? Why? What's so good about it? Next time, we're talking lenses, and I am going to give you my top 10 macro lenses of all time, and it covers almost all the big camera brands. Okay, so there'll be something for everybody there. Yeah, don't miss that. It's coming up in a few days. Until then, take care, stay safe, and be well. Next time.